Okay, welcome back to the Carnivore and Beyond podcast. And my guest this time is Imogen Webber. Now, I've known Imogen for an awful long time, actually. Not massively well when she was a kid, but I think she's about the same age as my stepdaughter Arabella. Is that right?
Yeah, we were the same age, yeah.
Yeah. So she grew up in the TM community where I moved up to in 1986. And now Imogen is doing some great stuff out there, and I've wanted to speak to her for ages. And I'm just going to start off with her bio, and I'll embarrass her with that because to give an idea of who she is, because some of the people in my audience I think are more from that sort of carnivore side and less from Imogen's world, where she's kind of getting pretty well known anyway. Okay, so Imogen is a spiritual mentor, shaktipat giver, and writer. She focuses on integrating, accepting, and embracing all aspects of the human experience, bringing the lofty ideals and concepts of spiritual attainment back down to a grounded experience of self. Imogen was raised as a TM meditator with the understanding that everything is consciousness. Even though she never self-identified as a spiritual seeker, she spent most of her life living and working within the TM organization. After the death of her closest friend, she found herself reevaluating all aspects of her life. This inevitably turned into an earnest spiritual search, leaving the TM organization and moving into the contemporary non-dual type teachings. She had a brief but profound spiritual awakening and went on to spend a year at Muji's ashram in Portugal, still searching for the peace and freedom that she was looking for. While this was a beautiful time for her, it also brought to light the difficulties of spiritual organizations that she had already seen in her days with the TM organization. Upon leaving the ashram, the fulfillment of her search finally came about through a single shaktipat transmission that she skeptically received after seeing the undeniable and dramatic change in her husband 6 months prior, also from a shaktipat transmission. Although this was the end of any searching, or searcher, she found this wasn't the end of the work, as she went through a period of intense integration, processing, and healing both physically and emotionally. 2 years later, she and her husband trained to be givers of the same shaktipat transmission that they had received. However, not long after this, they parted ways with the organization, having realized that while spiritual transmission is still a powerful tool, being a part of an organization was not an option for them anymore. Now finding herself the least spiritual she's ever been, and intolerant to spiritual concepts and posturing, she has recognized the need for down-to-earth spiritual exploration. She encourages fully the transgressing of the conditioning and concepts held up in spiritual organizations and authorities so that every individual can ultimately discover and stand in their own truth. That alongside a healthy dose of grace in the form of shaktipat. Contradictory, you might say, but such is life. That's a good bio. And do you know, it really is, it sounds a lot like my experience with all of these organizations and stuff. Anyway, Imogen, great to have you on. Welcome. Thanks for coming
Thank
on.
you. Thank you for having me, Phil.
So, tell me about growing up in the TM movement. How was that in Skelmersdale? I was there, and probably when you were growing up there, when I came up here, you were probably about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years old. And
Well,
what?
I actually moved there when I was 13, so
Oh, okay, you got there later.
yeah, I got there later. I grew up in mid Wales, and I actually had quite a difficult childhood. I had an alcoholic father and a mother who was going through her stuff as well. And so going to Skelmersdale was actually like this massive relief. Um, and it was great, actually, to be honest. I found my tribe, I felt like, for the first time. Wales was quite a traumatic place for me. And so to go to Skelmersdale and find these people who I really resonated with and really got on with, and I actually felt like I got to be a child for the first time in my life. So in that way, it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Um, yeah, loved it.
Cool. Well, back in those times, it was a little more vibrant and alive, wasn't it? I enjoyed it as well. I had a great time early on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember your mum. Pretty sure I remember your mum. Did she live with the Mercers or something? at
We
one
bought
point?
their house.
You bought the house. Oh, that was right. I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in
cool.
Middlewood. Yeah,
That's it.
yeah.
Cool. So, what were those formative years like? You were doing the TM meditation. Did you go on to do the siddhis for
Yeah.
everybody listening? The siddhis are a sort of advanced stage of the transcendental meditation practice where you get these sort of little siddhis or powers that come from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and you end up sitting in lotus and bouncing around on flying foam, doing the flying. Very, very bizarre. Some of the
Very
things I've
bizarre.
seen in flying rooms. But yeah, so what was that? How was that for you?
So I did, I think what they call YIC, which is when you're a teenager, you get the cities little by little. But because I started quite late in terms of I came to the school quite late on, I started them further down the road than most people. Like I was older when most people had already started. So I only got a few of the first sets. And then me and my husband and the company we were working for, which was a TM company, moved over to America. And it was at that point that I got the final lot and the Flying Sutra as well. So I got them a little bit separated. I didn't do the full lot at first.
Okay, so you went over to Fairfield, was it?
Yes, yeah,
Whose was that? Was that Jeff Gay's company?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
definitely.
okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Because my yogi buddy from my flying course, Mark Gaskell, went
yeah,
over with it as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. He was my boss. Yeah,
Was
yeah,
he
we went.
boss?
Yeah.
Okay. So cool. So how did you find those experiences within the TM movement? Was this sort of formative to the awakening that happened to you later, or do you think it was totally irrelevant? I'm still not sure.
Um, I think my answer to that would probably be both. And I know that's a bit of a cop out, but I'll
No,
explain
no.
why. It gave me like so I grew up with this idea of that consciousness was at the heart of all. And that gave me a different paradigm for how I experienced life from the start. I didn't actually know anything else other than that kind of view. TM to me was like going to church or brushing your teeth. It wasn't a spiritual quest. It was just a given. It was this is how life is. Um, and so for me, that informed everything. I didn't question it. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know any other types of religions or groups or organizations or techniques. I wasn't exposed to anything really other than TM. So in some ways, I see it as the groundwork. And I think the practice of TM, which I still recommend to people in terms of a technique out there. It's not the only one, but I think it's a very good one. Um, the organization gets a little tricky there, but for me, the technique was very good, and it gave me a really good grounding in knowing when someone is pointing to that awareness of the heart of all experience. I know what they're speaking about, not just theoretically, but experientially. And that was sort of the building block to everything for me. But I had to transcend it. I had to move beyond it ultimately. So that's why I say yes and no. It was the building block, but it it wasn't enough. It wasn't the end point of that. It was the flowering of it. Let's say.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. It wasn't enough, but it was also too much in a lot of ways. It was when it became tremendously overcomplicated with a million
Yeah,
Ayurvedic medicines, a million advanced techniques, and
yeah,
this and that, and God knows what. And everybody was chasing it. I think the funny thing was when Maharishi came over here and thought, well, everyone's going to be enlightened in 3 years, and then he ran into
yeah,
the reality of the chaos. But I am seeing up here now. I think it's quite a shame. I'm seeing people that are quite dissatisfied. I'm seeing people who have probably been chasing this for decades and it hasn't happened, and
mhm,
they're just going through the motions of all these prescriptions and
yeah.
also following the crazy dietary advice and getting very sick. And what do you think? What do you think's gone wrong with that? With it, because you in your bio, there's the business about looking through and seeing the problem with spiritual organizations. And I think, TM is not as sinister overtly as quite a few of them have become sometimes, but it does to me seem like a bit of a trap. It's almost like it forces you to keep searching for something that really you'd find if you just jumped off the train for a moment. What are you seeing with the TM movement now?
Well, I think it's not like you said, it's not just the TM movement. It's all structures in that way have the ability to go for the person to get lost in them. Because for me, what spiritual awakening it's a profoundly personal experience. I don't mean personal as in the ego, but it's an individual experience. It's the discovery of yourself. It's not about following prescriptions and being a good seeker. And that's where I think sort of organizations can get lost in. The focus becomes on how I am going to do the best as per prescribed by the organization. And if those teachings are taken too literally as prescriptions rather than a jumping off point for the person to really take a look into their own experience, then it's just paying sort of lip service to what the whole idea of awakening and enlightenment is, really.
Yeah, I'd love to get into, if you would talk about it. I hope you will. Is the actual what happened when you had this awakening experience? Because for me, and I've never had the opportunity, to be honest, to talk to somebody about this from the TM movement before, because either they scream at you saying how dare you, that can't have happened to you, you didn't do enough rounding courses, or they you just don't mention it. But with you, I mean, for me, it was a day in the back garden on the dome site in Stuart Withers' old house up the end there that we owned for about 10 years, and just getting rid of all the guilt of everything. I thought I should be going into the dome, I really should be meditating, I should be getting all, and I thought this is just religious guilt. And I just made a moment where I just said, that's enough. I've had enough of all of this. I'm just going to let the whole thing go that I've been into since the 80s. I've had enough. And in that very moment was when I just had to sit down on the wall, because there was everything that I'd been looking for. And so I don't want to go on about my stuff, but it was because of the TM connection. It would be lovely to hear what happened to you. What was that? Was it a moment? Was it a gradual growing? Was it a sudden flash? Was it a dropping away? What happened there? Tell me the story.
So actually what happened wasn't in the context of TM. Let me go back a little bit to what you read out in my bio. At the time, I was very heavily involved in the TM organization. In fact, I was involved in a sort of a track towards the leadership of the TM movement. I mean, they were thinking about the future, and they were thinking about who was going to potentially be around in the future to lead. And I was involved in something they called enlightened leadership. And so I was in the inner workings in some ways, in a small way, in the university, certainly in the US. And so I was on this track, and then my friend committed suicide, and I suddenly was like, what the hell am I doing with my life? That's what really struck me, was like, and she'd been involved in TM, and there was all these people around, and it wasn't, see, I make a distinction between the TM technique and the organization. I have to, because I think there is a big distinction. So it became quite clear to me that the track that I was on was not actually what was my biggest joy in life. It was just where I'd fallen into and where I was sort of being led, let's say. And so it was at that point that Martin, my husband, had been interested in satsang, and it was at that point that I sort of went, oh, what is this? Like opening up the curtains of there's something other than the TM organization here. Um, and I was just sort of vaguely interested, listening to, he had Ajay Shanti on and anyone he could find online. We had this whole schedule of, satsang teachers giving satsang and whatever. And I was sort of tuning in casually, let's say. And he wanted to go on an Ajay Shanti retreat and a silent retreat. And I was, I came from the TM world, and you don't do silent retreats in the TM world. It's very, you do lots of meditation rounding, but the idea of doing a silent retreat wasn't very appealing to me. But he sort of convinced me to go. And the morning of the retreat, a friend had given me Susan Segal's book, Collision with the Infinite, and she's a TMer. Recommend reading that book if you want.
This is the one where she had an awakening and then resisted it for ages and was freaked out for years.
Yeah,
yeah. I know about the book.
10 years. Yeah.
I know about the book. I haven't read it though. But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. So I was reading this book, and halfway through it, as it was in the morning, this was the morning of the retreat. I looked up. I was reading it, and I remember looking up at the skylight and being like, there's no difference between me and the tree. Like one of those like pop moments. And I'd had lots of lovely experiences with TM, profound experiences with TM, but nothing that ever sort of questioned my identity, really. Like it was experiences. It was spiritual, profound, beautiful experiences. But it was never pointing the light on who I was in all of this.
Yeah.
So I had this experience. Oh, sorry.
No, carry on. I was just going to say that I know. Can you hear me now? Got me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to agree with you really that it's the difference, isn't it? Because I used to be one of these people with real flashy experiences, have all these wonderful, beautiful experiences, probably because I took way too many mushrooms, back in the late 70s or something. But it was huge, flashy, wonderful things, and then I realised that's just really pretty much irrelevant. And anything that isn't there all the time, you're looking for the canvas that those experiences are painted on, aren't you? So yeah. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
Exactly, and that was the point. That was the point at which I had one of those like, oh, I'm not here to seek experiences. Like it was that recognition of who I am in all of this, and so I went on this retreat, and it didn't last. It didn't stick. It didn't abide in that way. It lasted, I think, about a couple of days, but it profoundly changed me. And then we went back to Fairfield, the TM movement. We'd gone away for this retreat, and my whole life shifted in that moment. There was this sort of causeless joy, this bliss, this just the watching of the content of life rather than the sort of being immediately, intimately immersed in it in that way. But I wouldn't describe that as even awake. It was an awakening, but I wouldn't describe that as the real point at which awakening took hold, let's say, for want of a better word. It just shifted my perspective. It was like a memory of that recognition of there's no difference between me and the tree happened. And it was at that point that the spiritual search, which I had never felt actively involved, even though if you looked at my life, you would think, oh, you're a spiritual seeker. I didn't feel like a spiritual seeker at all. This was just what I landed in being born to it, really. But at that point was when I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. This is, there's something here. There's something in this that I'm not seeing. I had a glimpse of, and it changed my whole world, but there's something there. And then the opportunity came to go and be on Muji's team in Portugal. on his video team, and we sold up everything in a space of 8 weeks and just jumped straight into that. But in terms of awakening, so Muji's was a really beautiful experience for me. Again, the organizations, it has its pitfalls, but I felt like he just opened his heart and his arms to us and allowed us to just be there. He was available. He was making himself available, and to be living and working with someone, it really gives you're just immersed in that. You're immersed in that sort of voyage of self-discovery, let's say. But it was interesting. We were, intimately involved and living in his ashram in Sahaja, and we went to India with him, and all of this. And again, beautiful insights, beautiful experiences, but still something there, still not what I was quite looking for, that recognition that I'd had in the morning of that Adyashanti retreat. It wasn't that. And Martin, he had, he was in India, and he was like, I'm done with this. He'd been the typical spiritual seeker. He learned TM when in his 20s, and, he was the typical, been into everything, read every book, all of that. And he's like, I can't do this. I can't do this for another 20 years. And he reached out to someone who was giving shaktipat. He had 2 people, and he was like, okay, whoever answers me or something first, I'll go with that. 2 people that were basically promising enlightenment. And I thought he was crazy. Like I was like, this is stupid. This is a waste of money. This is like a Hail Mary kind of, ridiculousness. And he had this shaktipat in India, and it changed him. I mean, it profoundly changed him. So much so that I couldn't quite believe it. The skeptic in me of like someone waving their hands at you on Skype was like, this isn't possible.
Give a little rundown of what shaktipat is, if people are listening and they don't know what it is, because I just realized some people might not know what it is.
Yeah. I mean, literal translation is divine transmission. Divine light, that energy, that divine energy, the energy that we all are, basically. I don't see it so much as a literal transmission of one person to another. That is on that relative sort of viewpoint. You could describe it that way. But as we know, you have to kind of go deeper, I feel, in life. And it's just that's what's arising, in the same way that, meditation or awakening arises. Shaktipat to me is that symptom of awakening that is happening. Is the Shaktipat is the pinnacle of that symptom. One of the ways that can happen, that can come about. It helps dissolve the held egoic structures, let's say.
Yeah, that's cool. I think there's something that occurred to me just now. Isn't it funny, this awakening business? It seems it seems like one of the last taboos to actually talk about it. Because as soon as you mention something like this, people say, you're on your high horse, you're showing off, you've got this, and it's when it happens, it's completely the opposite. Yeah. It's like awareness waking up to itself. And even this business of people recently, like my friend Tristan Haggard on Primal Edge Health, he's always saying, all these twats who say that they've got all this oneness and stuff. No, we're individual. Yes, but it's both and. It's not. There we go. Yeah, it's it. Yeah, it's not the jumping off into the whole space cadet thing. Although that can hit for a while, and you do. I mean, not only was I totally spaced out, but I was also insufferable. My poor missus.
Me too.
It was like, you do, don't you? And then, the spiritual ego thing takes over. And then it's like, why are you meditating? It's only a moment
Yeah, yeah.
surrender. Just stop it. It's a waste of time. It's absolute nonsense. I don't know how she put up with me, really. I was awful,
Yeah.
awful for a couple of years. But yeah, I think it's really important for people to realize that this is probably the natural state of a human.
It really is.
Yeah,
It's the base of our experience, and we just don't notice it. We're
yeah.
so caught up with the content of life and the experiences and the outward showing phenomena of life that we fail to recognize what's aware of all of that. And so awakening is held up as this big thing, but actually, and that's what I'm trying to show people is that in the work that I do is that it's ordinary. This is ordinary, mundane experience of life, and you're missing it. This is not some highfalutin, special person's, you know, elixir that only certain people get. This is your birthright. This is actually who you are at the base of your experience. This isn't something special, and particularly the TM movement, they were very had this thing of like those who know don't speak and those who speak don't know. And it's like, I see that pervading the spiritual world. And
But they forget about Maharishi. Like
well,
he should have shut up then, shouldn't he? Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy.
yeah, and this is where the both and thing comes in of like, you know, to admit it, at some point you have to admit it. At some point when you have that recognition in your heart, it's not some tooting your horn and sort of wanting accolades and people to shower praise on you and all of these kind of views that people kind of assume. It's just, no, this is how it is, and it's available to you as well. There's no, just me stating this is not me trying to be more than you or have some view that isn't available to you. It's not that at all.
Did you did you find? I did. I found that when I was like a meditator, or a siddha, even worse, there was an us and them. It was like, even though I never exactly looked down on people, but it was because I was always involved in the local community. I was a musician. I played with other people, and I had friends within the community, the local community here, which a lot of the TM people didn't. They kept very much to themselves.
Yeah.
But it was still like, yes, but I meditate, and they don't.
Yeah.
And it was almost like
Yeah.
and this even happens between the various groups. Like
Oh,
it's so funny that my girlfriend, she meditates, but she follows this guy John Yar in Leeds, and he used to have the I can't remember. Anyway, it's called The Path now. Anyway, apparently there's a lot of people in Africa got into it, and so she learned about it over there, and then she came over here. Now she's mates with him. I'm not allowed to meet him because I've got the wrong mantra, basically. It's so funny, isn't it? But it's not from her side. She's absolutely fine. But and then you have those awful potluck parties where everybody's bringing along all this farty food, this rice and dal and stuff, and they're all sitting around and going, how lovely everything is. And I was at one of those, and somebody said to me, one of her groups, and said, oh, how long have you been meditating? Oh, I don't know, maybe early 80s, something like that. I learned, oh, that's a long time. Yeah, I did TM. And you go, oh, that's almost that sympathy.
Yeah.
And then the same thing happened with Detta when I took her to one of our ones, and they were saying, how long have you been meditating? And, oh, such and such a time. But it's not TM. Oh, and you see this weird thing between them. And yet what everybody's missing is this underlying thing underneath all of it that makes a real mockery of all these organizations. As you say, techniques are fine, but the organizations are crazy. But yeah, there's so many myths about it. So many myths, particularly that you suddenly become infinitely wise, you suddenly become perfect, it strips you back to nappies, doesn't it, a lot of the time? And you just don't have you don't have a perspective on the world until it regroups. And after that was when I got very, very sick, and that was part of the whole integration process and stabilization. And I couldn't even find somebody to talk to within the TM movement. I had to talk to. Eventually, I phoned up Roger Linden,
Hmm.
and chatted to him because I knew him so well. He was great. He was so funny. He was a cool guy when he used to be up here, pretty much running the TM thing up here. And then he had this awakening. And then you talk to people in the TM movement up here about it. Oh no, Roger, no, that wouldn't happen
Yeah.
to Roger. And you get this weird thing, and you think, do you not realize that's what's going to happen if it happens to you? Your friends are going to
Yeah.
care. It's the same as the vegans. When you wake up and you're no longer vegan, your friends are all going to attack you like you're attacking. It's so weird, isn't it? Anyway, I'll shut up now. But that
Well,
was my that stabilization period
yeah.
is very strange, isn't it?
Well, the thing is, from my perspective, you have to transcend both the technique, the teachings, all of it. You have to transcend all of it in order to fully awaken to yourself. That's the nature of it. And so that's when you get this, like, sort of, I think, the pre-trans fallacy of, like, people think you've fallen off the path if you've gone off of it, but actually you've gone beyond the path. You've dropped the structure and the paradigm of that path, that technique. Now, you can include it in your story, and you can include it in, maybe how you got to where you are, but ultimately you have to let go of it. And so, yeah, every organization, every teaching that I can see has that in there, because they're speaking to seekers, and they want the seeker to get it. But the recognition of when someone does get what's being pointed to in their own direct experience, they no longer need the knowledge and what is being taught, because they've recognized it for themselves. So it should be a celebration, but in reality, it's not, because they're still trying to speak to the seeker. So that's how I see that whole sort of transgressing of that. And I think it's a natural part of awakening, that you do have to transgress that. You do have to let go of whatever got you to where you are. It's like the I say this all the time, the boat that gets you across the river, and then you I mean, it's not me that said it. Loads of people have said it. But it's very true.
It's a good one, isn't it? I always get the vision in the TM movement that they're in the boat, they've got to the other bank, and they're still
Yeah.
rowing. And
Yes,
it's like they're smashing
exactly.
against the bank.
Yeah.
And what I loved, I forget who it was now, but on Rick's thing, on Buddha at the gas pump, and one of them, he was using that analogy. And one guy just said, yeah, but Rick, it was on the other bank anyway.
Well,
And
yeah,
I
there you
loved,
go. That's a whole other discussion.
yeah,
But yeah,
I loved that one. But yeah, it's
yeah,
it's it's mad, isn't it? That stabilization process, and just to get rid of these, because if anybody's listening, they must, and they're not familiar with this. This is why I wanted to speak to you about it, because we can perhaps introduce people to what it actually is and what it isn't. It's much easier to describe what it isn't, obviously, but
infinitely. I mean, the Buddha. That's where his whole thing was neti neti, not this, not that. I mean, it is infinitely easier to describe what it is, because in order to, isn't, sorry, describe what it isn't. To describe what it is like, you can't, because it's trying to describe an object, and what it is isn't an object. So it's ineffable. It's undescribable in those terms that we want. The mind wants that sort of certainty and that clarity of, this is the object, and it has this shape and this border and this outline, which is why it's easier to describe what it isn't. And for me, what it isn't is, it's not a concept. It's not a way of thinking. It's not something that you've gathered up and learnt. It's actually the dropping of all concepts. It's the dropping of all assumptions and ideas about who and what you are. And what arises out of that is the awareness of all that is what I would describe as content versus who I am. And what I am is the awareness of that content.
yeah, beautifully described. And I think that one point I've always made is, when people think that you're saying there's some kind of tremendous attainment and isn't this wonderful and all that, it's like the difference between somebody who's had one of these awakenings and somebody who hasn't is really about 0.001%. Because all of the stuff that we were doing before and all of the stuff that we're driven to do is it anyway. This is it. This is the path. This is the goal. This is everything at once. And one of the worst things I think about, or let's not say worst, but most misleading things about the whole spiritual path is this chasing of desirelessness. You know, and I think
Yeah.
I think that we're given desires to find out what our path in life is, and it's almost an insult to ignore them
Yeah.
to whatever sort of creator or the universe or whatever you want to call it, because they have that plan for you, or this is your life path, and you're just resisting against it. Right, let's go into a nunnery, let's go into the TM movement, let's go into whatever, you know. And anybody who claims these little things and tells people that they've had these kind of awakenings gets looked on as being absolutely crazy or egotistical. I told my ex-missus, I swore I wasn't going to, but it came up in conversation one time. You know who she is. And she got so aggressive. So I've never seen her that angry. And it was like, eh? So if somebody had told me that, I'd always have been, hey, what happened? What was it like? What triggered it? Was there anything, you know, you'd have been really curious.
Hmm.
But now it's funny because now I feel that it's stable. I want to make something clear to people listening to this, that this stabilization process brings you back to somewhere where, you know, this old thing of sort of riding a donkey in the market, and then he's up the mountain, and then he's riding a donkey in the market, you know, and before enlightenment chop wood and carry water,
Yeah.
after enlightenment whatever. But
Yeah.
it becomes such, once you get used to the ordinariness of it,
Hmm.
and then you can come back in and realize that everybody is playing their part, everybody is exactly as they're supposed to be. There's no more looking down on anybody, there's no more judging anybody, there's no more,
Ah,
you know, you can do it for fun, you can laugh at somebody's trousers, or this vegan who's shouting, or this bloke, you know, who's whatever. That's fine. I'm English, I'm all for a whole load of piss taking, but you know, to actually take it seriously is another thing. So people misinterpret you. But would you feel that, just to stress that when this happens, if it does happen to you, it's the beginning of a path. You're not suddenly
yeah.
perfect. You have suddenly, this is where the work begins.
Yeah.
And you have so much more to do. I mean, I realized I was an emotional idiot, and I had to do so much work on that. I was eating all the wrong things. I was living under artificial light. I was playing the wrong music. Everything was wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And I had to spend years sorting that out. And it often happens after these
Well,
awakenings.
so this is the thing. There's in the spiritual movement, and I was guilty of this myself. There's in many spiritual movements, there's this idea that you have to. Oh, you will only stabilize in that awakening if you have a sattvic body or got this, that, and the other. You know, like that is the end of it. That you've dealt with all of your emotional stuff, you've done all your healing work, you've done all of that, and the end point is awakening. Now, for me, I had a rude awakening when the exact flip opposite happened. For me, awakening was the start, absolutely, without a doubt. I didn't realize how much I was avoiding. I didn't realize how much trauma and stuff I was really holding around, and how many concepts and old conditioning of how I should behave that I felt was me. And with awakening, all of that cracked open. And all of a sudden, I was sort of left there, oh, well, you know, what's all this crumble of my life now? And so it took it. I mean, I'm still going through this process. I'm not even going to sit in here and claim there's an end point to it, because I don't know. Now it's got a lot smoother. It's got a lot easier. You know, I now know the process that is happening. The intensity of those early days has dissipated and dissolved. But my God, I went through hell that first year. For me, I went through hell. And it first started out emotional hell, um, and also conceptual hell. Like I didn't know, I couldn't use words to start with. Like people would say a word, and I'd be like, "But what does that mean?" You know, because my whole paradigm of what I thought life was had fallen apart, and what I was left with was just this raw experiencing of life, but still with the rubble of life there, and not quite sure what to do with this, like picking through it, going, am I supposed to keep this? Am I supposed to, what is this, So that's kind of what happened to me. And then the bodily healing then needed to happen once a lot of the emotional healing was happening. And I would argue that I couldn't even do that prior to awakening. I couldn't go there because I'd had such strong, intact, egoic structures to avoid all that I was really, truly experiencing and feeling, that it had to go that way for me. Awakening had to be the point at which I was finally able to see that, because I was avoiding it all. I was pretending it wasn't there, and that was very. It was a good strategy, but
I had the same thing. I had, when I first got really sick, the physical stuff hit me first in 2010 or so, and even after awakening, mine maybe around 2006, I think, and then I coasted along for a bit and it was fine. But then when that hit, and even then I had to start looking at the emotional stuff as well as all the diet and everything like that. But I was even resistant then, going, well, I'm a great yogi, this is not from the awakening side. It's from the old conditioning of the TM side.
Yeah.
Where
all right things.
Yeah. I don't need all this messing about. That's for some sort of housewives on antidepressants and whatever. No, that's what I really needed. And you have to keep on kicking yourself right in the ego and letting it go. But it's much easier to let it go, because after a while you just go, you can come up with these things and you go, I'm not doing it. Yes, I am. You can do it kind of that quickly.
So this is it. It's like it becomes choiceless at that point, because it's like you recognize that this is just the way it's going. Like, and the thing is, it was always like that. But this is the awakened view: is that you recognize it. You actually you're conscious of it. You're conscious that I'm not doing any of this. This is just happening.
It's the paradox.
It's going that way.
The paradox of, is there free will or isn't there free will? There's both at the same time. It's interesting.
I would argue there's an appearance of free will.
Yeah.
But for me, what happened with that process of awakening was I had to deal with all the emotional stuff, which then cleared the way, and I then realized what a mess I was in physically. So that's what happened to me. I couldn't even get to the physical before because I had some pretty serious emotional stuff that I was dealing with, a lot of trauma that I just wasn't recognizing. And so when I was finally, it came forward to me in a very, very strong way. There was no avoiding it. There was no okay, I'll deal with this tomorrow. It was, I had some days where I was curled up in a ball on the floor. I can't handle this. I don't know how I'm going to even take another breath. That's how intense it was for me, that process. But what that process gave way to, when it finally had sort of cleared away, those pockets were clearing, was the attention on the physical body suddenly came in. And boy, I realized how much of a mess I was in at that point.
What did you find? Because my thing went the other way around. I had to clear a load of the physical before I cleared the emotion. But it's not. It's like you say. It's an ongoing process. I always think of it like a biscuit tin lid or something, where you push one side and then you have to push the other side, and then you push that, and then it comes off. You sort of go from one to the other, don't you? I'll fix a bit of that. I'll fix a bit of that. Even though there's one major thing. So what happened then when it sort of revealed the problems with the physiology? What sort of things were you facing?
Well, I'd always had trouble physiologically. I'd always had issues. From an early age, I'd go to the doctor and with stomach, particularly digestion for me was a big one. But I was always sick, always sick. Every month I seemed to have something. I was always sick, sickly. I wasn't thriving. But I went to the doctor when I was a kid, and I was having problems with my stomach, and they said, "Oh, you've got stomach migraines." They didn't even give me an answer to what was going on. So there was just a bunch of stuff that over the years was adding up to pretty, nothing life or death, but a lot of discomfort. I was in a lot of pain, but I wasn't able to acknowledge the pain because I was so caught up in my mind and my stuff that I was dealing with on that level, that it wasn't until the mind sort of quietened down and thinned out, let's say, that I was becoming really aware of how sickly my body really was. And I'd been on the whole vegetarian thing and vegan. I recognized I was lactose intolerant. I recognized it was a very gradual stage for me, like seeing all these different things piecing together and recognizing where I was having issues. But I wasn't really able to see the fullness of it until I was so in tune with myself through not being living in the content of the mind and the emotional stuff. Once I'd cleared all of that, then I became really in tune with my body. And just there was a lot of stuff that wasn't adding up to a very happy Imi here. And so I tried a bunch of different things. I did the whole vegetarian vegan thing for a long time. And then a friend suggested paleo one time, and I really started to thrive on that. But then I went back to the vegetarian Ayurvedic thing because I went back to the university with TM. And I mean, this is before awakening even. I was trying to figure this out, but I didn't have a clear view of it. It was only post awakening that like I was able to have that sort of clear view on what was going on.
So what? I understand you've had a load of improvements recently. So what's
Yeah.
been going on then? Have you
So
jumped on this mad carnivore bandwagon, or
I
what's been going on?
have, I have,
Yay!
I have. I still struggle with it. If I'm perfectly honest, I struggle with because I've been so like seeped in the paradigm of your 5 a day and all of this. I still do struggle with it. So the story of how I ended up going full carnivore was 2018. My husband had been following Jordan Peterson for quite a long time before he even got famous. He was watching his small videos that he would broadcast of his lectures at university. And so he was really interested in him, and I think he watched the Joe Rogan podcast. And he'd suffered with other sets of ailments, not the things that I necessarily, a lot of mood stuff and things like that. And he went, this is interesting. I want to give it a go. And at the time, we were more leaning towards going more vegan again. Like we've gone between different ways of eating over the years, but that was where we were going at that point. And I did a bunch of research. I was sort of up for it. I'm up for trying anything, I think. And I did a bunch of research, and I started to the symptoms that were being listed by other people who'd done this. I'm like, hang on a second, that sounds like me. There was a lot of stuff here because I've had a lot of weird symptoms that I've gone to doctors for, and they've never given me answers. And they always think it's separate things. And I was really struggling with this because intuitively I was like, it feels like this is all connected. I was having massive issues with my digestion, my reproduction, or like just bruising. I think I showed you the photo. Like I've really suffered from very severe bruising, and I got told by the doctor take a multivitamin. Like just really random symptoms. I was having UTIs every month. I was, I got a whole list of things. And so the more I sort of did research into zero carb, I recognized there's a whole lot of symptoms here that I can check. So maybe actually this would be good for me, even though, it was Martin that was wanting to do it. I thought, okay. Pretty skeptical that I'd actually survive and wouldn't get scurvy and all of these things. And then ethically also was a bit tricky, and just there was a whole lot of stuff that was tricky for me to get beyond. But at that point, I was having so many, I was so ill and so weak. Like I didn't have a strength to me about in my body. I like felt very weak and not thriving at all, looking sort of pale and not great, but inflamed as well. Like I don't know. There was a lot going on. So we tried it, and it was at that point that I recognized just how much pain I was living with. I knew that I was living with pain in my digestion, but I had no idea how much, because when you took away that pain, it was like, wow, I've really been living for my entire life. I just didn't really notice it. I was aware of it, but I didn't really notice it. So that's the point at which I was like, okay, there's something in this. And then I would have like a cheat, or I would have like something that was not, some plant-based something, and immediately the symptoms would come back. I'd get tight fingers, like everything was swollen and bruising. I have a week later, I get bruising all over my legs again, just any plant material. I don't know, I haven't figured out if it's all, but everything I've tried.
It's amazing. You sent me those pics. So is that when you kind of hit yourself a little bit, or it comes up totally spontaneously?
Both.
Wow.
Both. I mean, when I, like someone can touch me. If I'm eating plants, someone can touch me, not, nothing, but just press on me and I'll likely get a bruise.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And that's just what is apparent to people, but there was all sorts of, symptoms, inner symptoms that I was dealing with as well.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? So now you feel that when you're fully carnivore, that these symptoms died out, and I have the same thing, and obviously I see it tens of thousands of times.
Yeah.
It just happens constantly. And 5 years in, I've got no scurvy, and so But what do you feel about this business of the spiritual side of it? Because I've made a few videos on this, and I just feel that I'm more connected to my food. I feel like I'm more connected to how it nourishes me, where it's come from. I feel it is probably the most compassionate diet we can do. And that's why I started this podcast, really, because I'm seeing some amazing people on my groups, particularly when I sort of filter them off from the 100% carnivore group into that Beyond the Beyond group. And some of them are just the most calm, settled, peaceful people who have really reconnected with their spirituality in a big way. That's just such a silly word, isn't it, spirituality? But they've sort of reconnected with their essence even more when they've started to eat more animals. And I think we always did in our ancestry, and anything that's come about with these veggie diets has been through some lunacy with spirituality or religion, or some sort of control and business, or some owners and slaves, this sort of crap. And to me, I think it's definitely deepened my experience of where I am. Also being in touch with my body, which is no longer hurting anymore.
Yeah.
So how has that worked, Tin? Have you let go of the problems you had about freaking out about the ethics and this and that? How's it going?
I mean, it's a dance, because you get a lot of information thrown at you that is the contrary to what your direct experience is. And I'm all about direct experience. I'm all about trusting your direct experience. And my direct experience is of what very much similar to what you're describing. I feel very connected both to my body, but also the gratitude and the life cycle of all beings. Animals, humans, doesn't matter. I feel very connected to that life cycle now. I also feel very grounded in that way. There's a lot of people in spirituality, who are struggling with being grounded in that way. And I find that for me, meat is absolutely, without a doubt, helpful to me with that clarity as well. My God, if I have, and I occasionally do, we go out and I don't want to, we're eating with people and I don't want to make a fuss about it. And so I'll eat what is being offered to me. Very rarely now, but that we participate. But it's like, I notice the clarity of my thinking. It's like it gets muddy. It's almost like I describe it as minestrone soup. It's the connection between my intuition really, really goes as soon as I have plants. I've noticed that, like, there's a fog that happens in me. And so for me, what's become really apparent is trusting your experience, going against what you think you should be doing or thinking or saying, and actually coming back to what feels true to you. And that might change. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I think I'm going to be carnivore for the rest of my life. I don't know. I'm just going with what feels right, with what works for me, what the kindest thing is for myself and those around me. I don't categorize between humans and animals in that way as well. It's like, so I think for me, just following your heart is one of the biggest things, one of the biggest gifts as well that we can do for ourselves and others. And to me, that looks like eating meat right now.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I love to see when it comes into the whole spiritual world and to get, because I think so many times people give so much stock to what gurus say that as soon as they say something like, oh, meat's like what's his name out there now? What's his name? The guy who looks a bit, wait, so we've got robes and he's got a
Sadhguru?
There's the boy, yeah. And he's banging on about how horrendous it is to eat meat and all that. And so many people are going to listen because they seem to think that just because you've had one of these basic awakenings, you know everything about everything.
Well, this is where it gets a bit dangerous. And then this is, to me, all spiritual teachings across the board, whichever tradition, whichever teaching, whichever teacher you're looking at, if they don't point back to your direct experience and encourage you to point back to your direct experience, then they're just adding more concepts. You're just switching one paradigm, one set of concepts out for another. And that's no use to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely spot on.
So it might well be true for him in some way. In the same way for someone who is on the vegan diet, that might well be true for them. I hold space for that. I hold space for, like, everyone just doing what is right for them. But you have to first get in touch with yourself.
Yeah,
in
totally.
order for that.
I think that for me, I sometimes have the view that, oh, I had those years wasted and I was in so much pain and all that, and I got duped by all this spiritual Ayurveda, you must eat this. Whereas if you actually look in Ayurveda, they say that meat is the most nourishing food for the human body. If you look in the Charak Samhita.
Yeah.
But if you get caught up in that, it's all good. Because I'm such a lazy bastard. I'd never have got anything together if I hadn't been in so much pain. So this is what people go through. It's not like, you mustn't do this or you mustn't be vegan or anything like that. It's just getting rid of this business that meat is so evil, just so that people can have the choice. Because, I mean, look at you. Look at the benefits you've had from it. And you had all that brainwashing. And some people who weren't so open-minded won't see through it. Some of my friends up here, I won't mention their names, but they've died from cancer and whatever, even saying, I know you're right, but I can't do it.
Yeah.
Because of that brainwashing. And it's absolutely, it's heartbreaking, really, sometimes. Although, again, on another level, there's nothing wrong with death. We all die. Yeah. But it would be nice, as you say, just to be able to be in touch with your own path, your own feelings, so that you can develop at your own rate in whichever direction. And if that includes eating a whole load of meat, so be it.
Exactly. It's to be owning of your own truth is, I think, the kindest thing that we can, do on the spiritual path, on the life path, actually. And I think it so easily goes off into the realm of the shoulds. And for me, one of the biggest things that I try to encourage people is there is no wrong. There is no wrong path. It's your path. It's your life. Anything that happens along your way is for you, not against you. It's for you. So like you say, I was in, and for me as well, it's the same thing. I was in so much pain, but that would needed to happen for me. It wasn't wrong. Yes, would I rather it didn't happen? Of course. But it has wisdom in it. Every step of the way, our life has wisdom, deep wisdom. And sometimes we can't see it until we're 10 years out of it, 20 years out of it, and we go, that had to happen that way. So this is why I'm not a fan of people, oh, you're off the path. Oh, you're getting it wrong. Oh, you've got to do it this way. Oh, you've got to do it. Even carnivore, I don't even say that to people. Like, I don't preach that, you should do this. It's like, no, I meet whoever I'm meeting where they're at, where I'm at. We meet together, we connect. And I'm not going to judge you for where you are at. I'm not going to say where you're at is wrong. I might say, well, have you thought about this? And maybe that plants a seed. But it's your seed, and it's your seed to grow as well. It's not my seed. It's not for me to take that on. It's for each individual to experience life as they do. And as human beings, if we can encourage each other and ourselves to not fall into the shame and the wrongness of wherever we're at, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not being dogmatic about stuff. People see me as this carnivore guy, and I'm telling everybody to eat carnivore. No, if somebody comes to me and they're really sick, I'll say, yeah, it's probably best to eat beef and water for a while, and salt. And then when you're symptom free, you try reintroducing one thing a week. It's the only way you're ever going to know. People say, am I allowed to eat this? He's got nothing like that. Do whatever you like. But if you want to find out, if I could go back to when I first got sick, and if I'd have probably just fasted for a few days, then gone full carnivore for 6 months, got the symptoms down, and then reintroduced one thing at once, like egg yolks, like pork, like chicken, like, and then dairy, and then, you reintroduce one thing at a time, then I would have had a clear picture within 6 to 9 months of exactly what I could eat and what I couldn't.
Right. I'm still on that. I went the other way around. I haven't done that thing of going back down to the basics of just beef, salt, and water. I actually went through about a year of struggling to. I think I have a bit of a histamine problem, or different things I was struggling with, and I couldn't quite work out what it was. So I get what you're saying about starting there.
Hardly anybody ever gets that strict, but that would be the way to do it. There's very few people I've seen who are that disciplined to be able to do that. And to be honest, those are the sort of people who probably never got sick in the first place. So the rest of us who get sick are just big shambles with our organisation and whatever. Yeah. And so that's fine, but it's very difficult to do something that strict. And I still find it, I just go crazy and do this, and I drink too much wine, and I do, I do all sorts of daft things, and I always will.
Yeah, I love food. This is really really tricky because I love cooking. I actually, people who go, oh, you're doing it just for your taste. I'm like, no, I wouldn't even have meat if I was doing it. I love vegetables. I'm in love with the full variety of food. I mean, in terms of taste.
I'm not interested in vegetables. If I could eat buttery roast potatoes and chocolate all day, but I'd still eat a load of steak. But if I could do that, I miss them, but nothing else. Yeah. I'm not asked about the rest.
No, I definitely, I have my, I miss food in that way, and occasionally I'll go and I'll eat these things, and immediately the repercussions are too big for me. And so then it's like a learning visceral experience of, okay, that doesn't feel so good.
Yeah, I know. I had a load of roast potatoes at Christmas, actually. I think apart from a handful of berries, that's the only plants I've had in about 5 years. But no reaction at all, and they were great. But I won't do it again. I won't do it every day. I think then I'd be pushing it. So, you can always do those things. I just think it's totally safe to do that. I quite like it. I also like the rebellious nature of it. In the TM movement, I was always the guy with long hair and who would never cut it, and and now in diet, I love it. Just go completely carnivore. It's great. It's I'm the one. If I was at some social function, and I wouldn't be the one thinking I must eat the food not to upset them. I go, give me 5 steaks. Actually, sod it, make them raw, just to wind everybody up. I enjoy that, but that's just me. But just to bring it back to the point that this is available for people, that's all, and to teach people about individual foods and the plant toxins here, and how meat is very nourishing, everything's in it that you need, and it's not carcinogenic, and the plant toxins could be a problem. If people understood about this, then they could eat whatever they want and just think, okay, maybe if I fancy a bit of spinach, I won't do it every day and juice it for 6 months and get kidney stones like I did. And that was the most painful thing in the universe. But they would know that if they want some spinach, okay, leave it for a while, let the oxalates clear or something like that, until you get to a point like me where you have little or no choice about what you eat, when your joints have gone or your digestion has gone or something like that. And so no, to me it's just about education, and I learn things all the time. I'm always looking for things that's wrong with the carnivore diet. What might people run into? What problems? I don't give a damn if it's carnivore or vegan, what works, but I've just never seen so much healing on this. So that's why I also love the rebellious nature, and I battle with a lot of vegans online. I get death threats and everything. I quite enjoy it. I don't take it seriously. I laugh and whatever, and I think it's hilarious, really. I feel for them because I know that they're probably, if they're that angry, they're in some pain. Nobody's that angry and happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel that there's a lot of things that we as a society are going along blindly, believing how we should think and how we should feel. And there's to me, there's where the anger comes in, is like this disconnect between what if we had no rules and we had no, superimposed concepts of how we should behave, then we would just be moving in life in this sort of loving contentment of spontaneity. And I think that's where you get the anger, is where this sense of control comes in, of shoulds and shouldn'ts. And it's really destroying our hearts, I feel. Like it really hurts. A lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of sort of hopelessness as well, that a lot of people are feeling when they're disconnected from themselves.
Yeah, I think it's great how people in this spiritual world now are being responsible like that, like you are, and being able to put that to people that, like you say, point the finger back at them and get them to listen to themselves. I think another one who's great like this, I don't know if you've heard of him or come across him, but he did one of the other episodes of this podcast, Zahir Khan.
I love Zahir, yeah.
He's become such a good mate of mine, and we hang out a load. And when we're together, we never talk about enlightenment or spirituality or anything. We just talk about ridiculous stuff like two naughty boys would. And he's so funny. He is so funny. We did a talk together in Lytham St Anne's, and I almost crashed the van once. I had to actually pull over. I was laughing so much with the nonsense that he was on about. And this is what I love, this massive sense of humour within spirituality. It's been missing for so long. And this irreverence and being able to really take the piss and with a heart as well. And it's fine to do that. Now, what I'd love to hear about is the work that you're doing at the moment. What are you doing? How do you structure it? Is it online? Is it in person? You've got some satsangs going. I mean, what's going on here, and how are you bringing this to the people who come and see you?
So it's all online for me. I mean, I don't have a home. We move around. We practically live like monks. It's just how it's happened. It was not like some, moral decision to live that way, but it's just how it's happened. And so we do all of our work online. Through my website, beyondimogen.com, I meet with people all over the world. I mean, I meet with every country I feel like has been represented at some point. It's really beautiful. There's two elements to my work. I use shaktipat, the technique of shaktipat, much in the same way, you would use meditation or something else. But so it's a modality, I think, that really helps people. Um, it softens a lot of those mental densities. Um, so there's that element, but that's not where my focus is, actually. That's what goes out to the public often. So people have started to associate me a little bit with that I do these global shaktipats and stuff like that. But to me, the work that I do is meeting people, just meeting them where they're at and really encouraging them to, again, point back to their own direct experience. Anything that I say or offer up or question is just, for me, an opportunity for them to look at their own experience. And so that's how I meet people. My work often focuses, because I think there's a need for it right now, often focuses on post-awakening. I deal with people pre-awakening, but I also deal with a lot of people post-awakening, because there's so much out there to do with, you know, pre-awakening, you know, seekers, paths, and all of that. But there's more and more people awakening right now. Just ordinary, you know, we're not talking big spiritual gurus. We're just talking, you know, the guy down the street, just awakening. And then what that looks like in your life, because your life kind of does fall apart. It doesn't necessarily fall apart on the way it looks, you know, the whole thing of chop wood, carry water before chop wood, carry water. It doesn't necessarily fall apart in that way, although it can. But what falls apart is your conditioning and your concepts, and all of these things start to fall apart. And it can, those first few months, certainly, it can feel very disorientating. It can feel very unexpected, because people have views of awakening that it's all going to be great. When I awaken and everything's going to be great, and I'm going to have this wisdom, and I'm going to, you know, be sorted, and everything's going to be fine and dandy. And the reality of awakening really isn't that in most cases. Some people it is. Some people have done a lot of work prior, and, you know, they just sort of slip into it, let's say. But for most people, that's not the case. And so a lot of my work focuses on the cleanup around that. And the cleanup around that also includes the ideas, the concepts, and the expectations of what awakening is. Because you can awaken to your nature, but still be holding on to concepts and ideas and expectations. And so you're still looking for something other than what you have discovered in yourself. So a lot of focus goes on that as well, of like just like trying to pick apart and see where someone is maybe holding a subtle expectation of how life should look post-awakening. And that's a big one. There's a lot of work to be done on that one for most people. I think you can probably agree that it just, yeah, it becomes very tricky, that one.
Well, I envy you, because I would love so much to be talking about this more. I love it when somebody comes to me and says, I'm fully carnivore, and I've done some emotional work, but still I've got some problems. And I go, now this one's going to be interesting. Instead of somebody coming along and going, can I eat bacon? You know, which is great too, because you can see great improvements in them. But
Yeah.
it's lovely when you can really get into that stuff. I mean, one thing that I found very useful was Adyashanti's The End of Your World.
Beautiful,
You know,
yeah.
it was a great. I bunged that in the headphones, and it just threw so much into place for me. It's good.
Yeah.
I hope I can pay him back sometime. Rick Archer has been on to me about seeing if I can get him onto the whole carnivore thing and sort out his Bell's palsy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure that's just inflammation. That would be fine. So I know he's not a veggie, but he needs to take the bun off his hamburger.
Yeah.
But that's his book was fantastic and so helpful. And so, how is this Shaktipat thing going? Are you doing the old Muktananda thing? You're tapping people on the forehead and then they go down like they're tased?
No, no, no. For me, it's more like opening up the windows and doors of any sort of yeah. That's how I experience it. It's almost like I'm facilitating the opening up of the windows and doors of someone's sort of tightness of their ego, and allowing that natural sort of conscious energy that is at the heart of all experiencing to completely permeate their self. So it's not. I'm not. There's no magic here. There's no me doing something to you. It's
I was
just
messing about the Mukta
yeah.
thing.
No, no, no. But it's it's a mystery ultimately. Like this is not something that I take ownership of like I'm doing this, but it's something that I've seen happen again, time and time again. And again, I come back to trust your own direct experience. And for me, that has been Shaktipat has helped me and others. And so I trust that. I trust it because I've experienced it. And I've experienced many others who have had the effects of that. And so yeah, that's where I fall on that is not I'm not this technical person who can explain to you all the ins and outs of why this is working, and I haven't got scriptures behind me to tell you why this and convince you why this is the thing. I have experience. I have my own direct experience, and I have faith and I have trust in that direct experience. And so this is why I continue to use Shaktipat as a modality, because it works, not because conceptually I can explain it and it makes sense. What we're talking about with awakening is beyond the realm of making sense in the mind anyway. So I go with it on those terms.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Taking people back to the intuition. I mean, the byline on my website is developing your intuition so you don't need us anymore. And
Yes.
and this is so important in this day and age of science and studies and people deciding what to eat because of some ridiculous study that was done on people that were totally irrelevant to them. Instead of just like, how do you feel? Oh, well, that's
Yes.
just an anecdote. No, this is how things worked, This is how to get back in touch with our ancestral nature. Everybody goes on about this ancestral movement and eating like this and getting the light right and doing all of that's great. But isn't this the absolute key to our ancestral nature? That's all it is. That simple, isn't it? And if that was brought more, it's the one thing I've not seen brought into the whole ancestral movement, which is what I'm trying to do, is trying to link it up to all the rest of the things that people have figured out about, feel the seasons, get outside, get your feet on the ground, have good social interaction, have all of this sort of thing. But how about we just wake up as well?
Yeah. So, like for me, all of these things are beautiful and great. Like, and this comes down to meeting someone where they're at. They might just be interested in this. They might just be interested in that. But it's like, for me, the question of humanity of why we go on this spiritual search is the question of suffering and the question of, of who am I and why is it the way it is? And so you can heal that and you can integrate that in the minute ways of through food and through all of these different ways. The ultimate answer, I feel, is awakening. But I'm not there to just say this is where you should be. You should be awakened, because that's just as much load of garbage as the rest of it. It's like, be where you are. Move in what feels right to you. Know that there is a possibility of something other than maybe what you're experiencing now, whether that is pain in the body, whether that is existential, what the hell am I doing here kind of questions. Know that there are answers and solutions to that your nature answers, your direct fundamental reality answers a lot of those questions. But be where you are. Don't assume where you are is wrong.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the nicest things I heard was when you're talking about people getting stuck in things because of tradition, and this lovely description of tradition as brainwashing from dead people. I love that.
Sounds really good there.
It does, doesn't it? It's nonsense, really, isn't it, when you look at it that way? And we got, oh, well, in our family, we've always done, oh, no, well, in our culture, we've always done, no, forget that. Just what do you feel? Break out
Yeah,
of it.
it becomes like I love using this sort of idea, like you're taking the description as a prescription. And so find out what your description is. And your prescription is not something you need to do. It's still a description of what's happening for you. Like it's still the natural unfoldment for you. And like we have all these rules in society and all these shoulds, and they have come somewhere along the line. They came from a description for someone. And they've been distorted and taken, and people blindly sort of trust them and don't question them, and we have, you know, assumptions built on assumptions built on assumptions, and you get quite far away from that initial description, and then you have all these prescriptions, and they don't actually bear any resemblance to the initial natural spontaneous description of what someone has discovered for themselves. So it's just, for me, it's just bringing it all back down to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting back to the intuition. It amuses me in the diet world when everybody's weighing this out and counting calories and how many fat macros have I had today and how about what is it you fancy eating? Eat it till you're full and wait till you're hungry again. You know, I mean, put some scales and some calorie counters out in the Serengeti. I guarantee you all of those animals will ignore them. There's no
But the
need.
thing is, you have to be in tune. For that to work, you
Exactly.
really have to be in tune with yourself. And
Yeah.
that's the bit that's missing.
You
And
have to
that's
come
the bit
down
that,
through all the layers, and people have
yeah,
different layers, and then finally you can listen to your body.
yeah.
Yes, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the bit that I feel like I'm focused on, is trying to encourage, let's say, people to be more in tune with themselves, to be, you know, to let go of those things that actually aren't naturally their own thinking and their own experience. They're the conditioned voices of shoulds, and they lead you astray. They lead you astray from what naturally you would be doing.
yeah, yeah. So listen, we've been going about an hour and 20 now, and maybe we should wrap it up soon. But let people know where they can find you, what you're up to, and what sort of things they can contact you about, and through which channels. And any last thoughts, anything, whatever that you'd like to say that we haven't touched on? Off you go.
Well, we've pretty much covered a lot of things
I
there.
think so. Yeah.
Yeah. You can get in touch with me. Beyondimogen.com is my website, and pretty much has everything on there. All the ways, channels of getting out, reaching out, email, all of that. I've recently started a YouTube channel. I've myself and my husband have had a YouTube channel for a while, but I've started a YouTube channel, so I'm going to be putting more videos and things like that. I have a group meeting as well, twice a month. All details of events and stuff like that, and how to book a session, they're on that website basically. And as for what to get in touch with me, I really don't have any rules about what I meet people about. I like to meet people who are open to just exploring wherever they're at. My focus is on awakening, but that comes about in many different ways as far as I'm concerned. Whether it's through diet, whether it's through dealing with emotional stuff that is going on. I have some people who come to me who've suffered from severe anxiety for years, and they've tried every medication, every therapeutic technique, and so I come at it in the way that I think of the world, and that can help. And so I don't have any rules about who I meet. I turn up at the page, let's say. I turn up in front of people, and we see where we go. And that's what's most important to me, is to if someone's looking for something and looking to connect with themselves particularly, then I'm there for that, I guess, is where I fall on this whole thing.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on. That was I really enjoyed that one. It was fascinating, and really good luck. You're going to do a conscious TV interview soon, I understand. Yeah. So that'll be fun, and I'm sure it'll all go as swimmingly as this one, if not better.
Thank you, Phil. Really, really joy to speak to you. I loved it. You popped in on my group a few weeks ago, and it was
that was fun. I wish I could jump in. I mean, I love it. I love those groups. I love to be able to get to Zahir's ones as well, and just sort of sneak in the back. The trouble is he always just starts taking the piss out of me and whatever. It's difficult for me to sneak in there. But it's I love it. I love it. You sit there. It's like the old TM things where you just sit there and bliss out listening to some old Maharishi tape or something. We still all love a bit of bliss, and those kind of meetings are great. It's got pretty much nothing to do with what we're actually talking about, but it's lovely to just sit there and listen to somebody chatting. And I had that with your thing too, and I'd love to just drop into loads more, to be honest. It was great fun. It was like a holiday for me. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for what you do. I think you are absolutely spot on with the way that you approach all this stuff. And I wish that there were far more teachers out there looking at things in the way you do.
Yeah, I think it's happening, actually. I'm watching it. I'm seeing the change. The old paradigms are shifting in terms of spirituality. And I think we're in very interesting times. I think there's a lot of more integrated spiritual teachers, let's say, people who are including the wholeness of life rather than just this aspect or that aspect. And I'm really excited, actually, really excited.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah.
Okay, Imogen.
Okay. Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome.
Son of a lighthouse, keep her